And welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick. And as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, disaster recovery, emergency response, crisis management, and communications, and anything that can be related to those topics. I want to remind everybody that if there's a topic you want us to specifically address or talk about, please feel free, go to the show website. There is a button underneath, I think somewhere on there in the middle of the page, where that you can send the host an email. I do get all messages and I do respond to all. Let me know what the topic is you want to talk about or who should be on the show, and we'll try to get somebody to talk about your topic. Try to get the person you're talking about, or even get yourself on the show to talk about something that's near and dear to your heart with regards to what we'd like to talk about on the show. As many of you know, in May, I attended the Continuity and Resilience Today conference in Toronto. It was a great conference attended by some very knowledgeable people and a good crowd. And I reached out to many of the speakers to see if they want to talk on the show. And lo and behold, quite a few did. And the very first person that I'm talking to from the show is somebody I met, someone who's very, how do I describe you, Suzanne? Very lively, very open, very friendly, very approachable, a wonderful lady, Suzanne Bernier, who spoke on climbing the continuity career ladder for millennials, how to make your way to the top. And having spoken to Suzanne before, I know that a lot of what she has to say probably is for everybody out there, because I know one of the topics that came up is that at the CRT conference, and I've seen on forums, is that our knowledge base is getting older. Cough, cough. So some of the newer people coming into the industry, may need some tips on how to really boost their career. And that's what Suzanne was talking about. So hopefully everyone that's out there that's listening, who's been in the industry for a long time or at whatever stage is just joining, is going to pick up some really interesting tips and as Suzanne and myself chat. So I'd like to welcome to the show Suzanne Bernier. Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be part of the show and to be part of this, Alex. I wanted to be able to, when you reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to share my thoughts based on kind of a summary of my presentation at the conference, I thought, I jumped at the opportunity because I thought the better we can get our message out to people in a variety of different ways to let them know how to be able to enhance their skills and get them that other position or that role or that visibility that they need, the better in this industry as it's growing and as we need more professionals coming in and being specialists in the field of emergency management and business continuity and emergency management. So thank you for that opportunity.
I'm glad you accepted. Can you give us a bio of yourself, your biography,
Sure.
How you got to where you are and what you've done? Because I know there's some exciting things in there.
Yeah, and it happened, and I think a lot of us in the emergency management and the business continuity field that have been in it for several years now probably come from similar backgrounds where we didn't plan. None of us really grew up saying, I want to become an emergency manager or a business continuity manager when I grow up. It wasn't one of those types of professions, and it's a fairly newer type of profession. So I got into it in a very indirect kind of way, which I think a lot of us did that got into it 20-plus years ago. But I was actually a journalist by trade. I graduated from journalism. That's what I went to school for. And I was a journalist. And then I ended up leaving the journalism industry to be in the other side of the industry, to be a government press secretary. And so I did that for a while. And then ended up getting out of the government press secretary role and being assigned to be a spokesperson and a press relations person for our public safety division. One of the areas was our Emergency Measures Ontario, it was called at the time. And it was our state level or province level emergency management agency that I was assigned to just be a spokesperson for. And this was back way before Hurricane Katrina, before 9/11, even before the ice storm of 1998. So a lot of people, including myself, weren't even aware that there were these types of organizations out there. And so when I found out and was assigned with this role, I thought, wow, I mean, this is amazing that this organization even exists, and they do what they do and help communities and organizations recover from disasters and respond to them. But I don't want to just talk about what they do. I want to be one of these field officers. So I went into the director one day and I told him that. I said, I don't want to be the spokesperson. I want to, how do I become an officer? And then at that time, there was only one school in Canada where you could get trained in emergency management, was the Canadian Emergency Preparedness College. And so they sent me there, and I went and took all of the courses at the time that you needed to take, took them all, and came out, and there happened to be an opportunity, and it's all about timing as well, where the timing was right. I happened to just come out now. I had been able to vocalize, which this is also kind of like when I share my story, I let people know to take tidbits away as well, which as I was doing it, I didn't really realize. But now when I look back, I think, oh, okay, well, luckily I made that decision to do that or say yes to this or not. And those are maybe some tidbits that as I'm maybe telling my story, if people can kind of take from it and personalize it themselves and maybe take some tidbits away. Like one of them was, now I realize and I look back thinking, for me to be able to just vocalize and say, instead of just thinking and wishing, oh, I don't want to just talk about all, what these officers do. I want to be one of them. But actually to sit down with the director and tell them that that's what I wanted to do, it's worth a shot. I had no idea whether or not they'd say yes or not or laugh me out the office or whatever. But I took a shot.
If you don't ask,
and then
it
happened, and then the timing as well, where they said, well, then you have to go right away. These courses are going on, and I took a shot, did it, came out, and that timing happened where an officer position happened to be opening up, and I applied for it. Originally, there was a little bit of a concern because of my size and age and being a female at the time and being deployed potentially alone to certain potentially dangerous and unsafe areas. It was definitely a health and safety issue. There were some issues about that, too, about their concern of assigning me as an officer. But we were able to address those, and then I got the officer position. So that's how I got into the field of emergency management. And that was now 21 years ago. And it was just a few months before what we call the ice storm of the century happened. And then it just happened that because I was a field officer just a few months in, and I got called out to be deployed to that emergency that ended up still to this date being the largest one in Canada for a deployment. That really was just, getting my training right there in the biggest emergency that we had. But little did I know that would happen, and that I would get that on-site field training by being part of this deployment for that ice storm. So I did that for 5 years. I was an officer for the province and responded to different emergencies. But when there weren't emergencies, what our job normally was as an officer, and there were 4 of us at the time, now there's a lot more of them spread out across the province because there's a lot more need now than there were 20 years ago. But our role also, most of the day-to-day role, was to work with communities that we were assigned, and let's say I had 45 communities in my territory, and my responsibility was to work with them to make sure that they had appropriate emergency plans in place for their communities, that their responders were all on the same page, that we would run exercises and evaluate them every year, and do training on crisis communications and different things. Then incorporating business continuity years later when that started becoming more of a concept in the emergency management field. Pandemic planning, a lot of different things depending on what was going on and what the heightened risks were at the time. And, of course, now we've seen that change incredibly over the last 20 years. The risks now are very different than they were back then. What we were trained for 20 years ago is quite a bit different than what we're training people for and to be prepared for now.
It is. We have to keep our skills up to speed, so to speak, and constantly learn from each other and what's going on in the world. You can't just rely on the textbook you may have had 20 years ago. It keeps changing. You mentioned something,
and that's another thing I think that people who are in the industry that want to be able to enhance their either their visibility within their own organization or globally or whatever it is to recognize that fact too, and to be aware of the need to be able to always look ahead and be prepared for in advance of the next threats and risks, and really be someone who's looking ahead to technology and accepting that there are other ways that we could be doing things and new innovations and adaptations that we could be using. And I've noticed that the people who do make it up the ladder and become successful in whatever career it is, really, are the ones who are open to that and open to realizing that it's not just about what we learned 20 years ago and what the state of the world was or what the state of business was 20 years ago. It's what is happening now.
Exactly. I like, not that I like reading about disasters, but I'm always reading the news websites or articles or magazines, trade magazines that come out with new ways of thinking, new ideas, because if you had a disaster, let's say, you were taking care of one of your 40 communities and one of them, hopefully not, fingers crossed, touch wood, had a disaster, then I'm going to pay attention, what did you do? How did you do that? What went well? Would I be able to do the same thing, where I am now? How would I change that? And that's what we have to do to keep growing.
Right, yeah. And being able to recognize the people and the external sources and resources that we are able to have access to, especially nowadays that we didn't before, because of social media and just because now it's much more of an organized effort to be able to respond to emergencies or disasters across North America. But I think it's something that obviously we still need to be working at, and it's just been a really great experience. And the other thing that I've been doing a lot, so I was doing the emergency management officer thing for 5 years, and then I went to our nuclear commission and ended up working for them for a year because I wanted to get more of a feel for the nuclear side of things. I had a couple nuclear facilities in my territory that I was working with, and I really wanted to become more familiar with that. So that's another area that I would advise people if they want to specialize or they want to become more familiar in a certain area within emergency management or business continuity or risk management, to identify and take a look at, if you're having more enjoying working on these types of plans specifically, there's probably a reason for that. And if you want to learn more or become an expert in that, why not do it? Nothing's stopping you from doing that, especially now that we have so many resources online to be able to get free training in a lot of instances, to be able to learn more on whatever it is that we want to focus on and specialize on. So that's the other suggestion that I advise people, is to focus on one of those other areas that they're interested in. And if they want to make a leap and see if maybe that's their interest, and that's why they feel a special need to work on that area, then do it. You'll know what feels best for you, and that's kind of something that I felt that I needed to do, so I did that. I only did it for a year, but that's all I needed, to be able to know that, okay, now I had more of that knowledge on the nuclear area and had developed more of that different kind of work, where that responsibility was more of wasn't a response issue, because fortunately we haven't had any nuclear accidents or incidents in Canada. However, it was something that we had to be prepared for, and made me recognize that it was something that I just wanted to become more knowledgeable in. So did that, and then afterwards came back to the province, and then started on the BCP side. And then the province had decided that they wanted to incorporate business continuity plans and develop business continuity plans for every one of our ministries in the government of Ontario. So I was tasked as being part of the team that would be responsible for training all of these new business continuity people that were assigned to develop all these business continuity plans for ministries. And most of these people who'd been assigned those positions had no background in business continuity, had no idea what business continuity was. So our little group's responsibility was really to let people know and train them in what business continuity was all about. So we all went and took the course, the DRI course, and our little team, and then we became sort of this little in-house training team to develop the business continuity plans and programs for the initial programs and plans for the Government of Ontario. So that's another piece that happened. And again, just from taking advantage of another opportunity, and I as well, I had no idea. My background was emergency management, more the boots on the ground, the people part of the thing. I'd heard of BCP, a little bit, but wasn't that. But I was open to it and thought, if this is a need, then and recognize that this is going to be more of a need. And then, of course, now it is a need for everyone at every size of business that we've seen examples of continuously, of how businesses are much more successful if they've got business continuity plans in place and they suffer from disasters. Of course, you'd know that. But it's, and I've kind of lost my train of track there, so maybe this might be a point where you want to kind of like ask me a question or steer me in a direction if I'm going off somewhere, but...
Well, actually, we've come to the end of our first segment, so we're going to take a break. We're talking with Suzanne Bernier, and we're talking about climbing the continuity ladder, and we're getting some tips on things we can learn to enhance our own careers. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe, and in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.